Hey everyone. In this video, I'll be talking with Samuel Brealey, who's a marketing consultant, and we talk specifically about marketing for smaller businesses and what that means and how you can still work on a strategy and what to pay attention to, and also, of course, the differences with a lot of the strategies we hear that really work for bigger companies, but how to apply them to smaller companies isn't always that easy. So I really enjoyed this conversation with Samuel, who's like a really smart guy who I admire. So I hope you enjoy as well. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions for Samuel. I'm happy to ask him. And of course, if you like the video, subscribe, like, and hit that bell and all the stuff people do on YouTube. See you around. Samuel, how are you, man?
I'm good. I'm very happy. It's a very sunny day. It did snow this morning, which is a bit weird. So, yeah, I'm sure
Same
I saw a
here.
lot of people. Yeah, very, very odd. Yesterday it was 16 degrees and it snowed this morning, and now it's nice and warm again. So I've got the sun on my face, so I'm in a good mood.
Awesome. Well, I hope that shines on our interview. I've known you a little bit from the Twitter sphere, I suppose. We've been having some on and on engagements about marketing and branding and stuff. So I kind of know what you talk about and who you are. But for the people that don't know you, could you do like a small introduction?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm Sam Brealey, and I'm a marketer. I tend to just say I'm a marketer rather than a marketing consultant or anything more specific, because I work with smaller businesses, and anyone who's used to working in smaller businesses, marketing is quite all encompassing. So, in terms of what I do, well, I mean, if I go back a bit further, I started in digital. And then, of course, as I got more experienced, I went into other things as well, and then kind of just became like a general all-rounded marketer, really. So, yeah, I mean, small business marketing is quite broad because you're really expected to kind of do everything. So, in obviously bigger organizations, you have people with specific job roles doing specific things, but in small businesses, you kind of end up doing a bit of everything, which is what I like to do.
Yeah, I recognize that. I have similar thoughts about it. It's really like when you come into those corporate spheres, it's funny to see how like narrow somebody's job can be. Well, I guess what you and me do is often like a little bit of everything. Like maybe before we actually dive into some of your thinking, I'd love to get some definitions down. Of course, these don't have to be yours or they don't have to be like the perfect definitions, but just to get your thoughts on some of these. Are you ready for it?
Yes, go ahead.
uh,
I'll try.
so, so what is a brand?
Oh, what is a brand?
Bam! Open the
I'm gonna
door.
be well, I mean, if we're talking small businesses, I'm gonna be controversial and just say it's another word for business.
Ooh, interesting.
Mm.
Let's get back to that later. What is marketing?
Marketing is pretty much, again, in small businesses, it's really anything that is about creating revenue or profit for a business. The best analogy I like is Tim Ambler's analogy, which is that accounting is about counting money and marketing is the opposite of that, which is about revenue creation, which I like. It's just a nice, simple explanation.
Love that. What is branding?
Branding. Okay, so this is where this is the tough
Now
one,
we're
isn't it?
getting into
Brand.
the weeds.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna cheat here and do two. So branding, again, in small marketing, small business marketing, it's the visual side of stuff and finding an identity and a voice and like a style. And style, I mean that really broadly.
Yep.
And then, of course, there's brand management, which is much more managerial. That's about, you know, managing product portfolio and lots of other stuff, which is a bit more technical, despite the fact
Interesting.
that they annoyingly have, those same names. So I studied marketing, and brand management was nothing about style or tone of voice or anything creative, really. It was all about managing business, really, from a product portfolio point of view, primarily.
Yeah, and there's like a lot of confusion. For example, when you type in brand strategy on Wikipedia, you get forwarded to the brand management page, which has always been interesting to me. So what is brand strategy to you then, or is it the same as Wikipedia says?
Well, for me, in terms of again talking from the perspective of someone who works in smaller businesses, brand strategy slash marketing strategy, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of small businesses, they have a product idea, and that's kind of all they've got. Or they're a business that's got some history behind them, but they're not really defined as such. They're still very product driven. They don't really listen to customers or even talk to customers. So for me, it's brand slash marketing, and in my view, it's just marketing. So I will be advising people on stuff that's really technically brand management, but I just say it's marketing because like the clients know what that means, and employers know what that means. When you start to go into the details of branding versus brand, it's a conversation there, to be honest, not that interested in. So I always
Yeah,
try to
no.
use the language that the customer uses, which again, that's kind of what marketing's supposed to do, I think.
No, but we can get like that's the problem, right? We can get really deep into this, but it's so contextual, as you said. Like, and when you mentioned about like brand strategy and marketing strategy kind of being the same thing, I guess it's like I don't know if you've seen this idea by JP Castlin. He thought about like the layers of like strategy and like the I see those layers in like big organizations. They are actually there and there's functions, but the smaller the organization, the more it becomes like just beep, like one line. And I guess that's what you're experiencing in that field as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think the conversations and debates we have within our circle of marketers and within marketing itself as a field are very different conversations to those that people have around what marketing can do for them as businesses. So, I'm pretty good friends with JP, and we have some really good, deep, meaningful conversations. But it's not stuff I would ever talk to a client about because, again, the client doesn't care; they're not interested. And I think for us, it's more about us understanding our discipline, so we know how to apply it. It's a bit like being a plumber. Someone pays you to fix the pipes. They don't pay you to kind of explain the differences between the pipes. So you can have those conversations amongst ourselves, but it's not something that businesses themselves care about. Do you know what I mean? And that sometimes
Yeah.
I think a lot of people um it's like people like Gary Vee. People say, how does Gary Vee get so many fans? What if so many people like Gary Vee? And he's wrong about most things he says, but the reality is he talks in simple, down to earth English, so people can understand what he's saying, even if it's not true, even if it's not right. you know and there's a lesson there, I think, for marketers.
Absolutely. Yeah, you send me I send the Mark Ritson bullshit top 10 and I just watched the video and he was talking about like Gary Vee as well. Like in a way it's props to him for like building that and like Byron Sharp is never going to get the amount of influence a person like Gary Vee has, mainly because it's like it's not that snackable for a big group of people, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that again, there's marketing, and then there's marketing itself. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. So we need to get the shit flowing, as you said, like the pipes. We need to clear the pipes and just have a
Yeah,
go at
yeah.
it. Um,
Yes.
so you talk a lot about smaller businesses and doing marketing in that world, which I think is very good because it's like we often see examples in this world, and there are always examples of big companies because those are the ones we all know, but that's often not applicable. And I often get that same question like from smaller business owners like, so we're here, we're small and we really want to grow, but we don't have the resources to do so. Where do we start? Samuel, tell us.
Well, that's I think that's always the difficulty. I mean, when I first stepped into marketing, I very much thought it had to be done rigidly and properly. And by properly, it was, I have to follow everything by the process. It has to be how brands grow. It has to be reaching all category buyers. And the mistake I was making was that I was basically just doing what people who don't know what they're doing do, which is looking for answers from other people and trying to apply their solutions. So someone would, a small business comes to you and they say, how do we do advertising? You go, well, Les Burnett and Peter Field say you got to do the 60-40 brand to activation ratio, but that's nonsense if you're a small business that has no cash. And to be fair, when you talk to those guys anyway about smaller businesses, as I have done, they will say, well, yeah, of course, it's a small business, it's different. So the people who work on this stuff, again, as you said, know that it's not applicable to smaller businesses. So for smaller businesses, there is like a vacuum. There is so little information as to how to do it properly. But what I think is, again, it sounds like such a cop-out answer, but it depends. And it depends on the context of the situation that a business within is in. So for me as a marketer, the first thing I need to do is actually try and understand the situation. What the hell is actually going on with the business? What do they want to do? And another thing that's really important, I think, to do good marketing in the small business context is to really understand the motivations of the owners of the business. And if you say, why do you want to do marketing? They will say, I want more money. And you say, well, why do you want more money? And then they say, because I want more profit. And you go, well, yeah, but why do you want more profit? And then they go, because in 5 years' time, I want to sell the business for £1 million. And then you go, that's the real plan. And when you've got that information, you kind of know their mindset, you know what's important to them. And then your job as a marketer in that context is to basically help them reach that goal as a manager or a business owner. And then of course there are smaller businesses that just want a couple more customers, so it might be quite a simple job. And then there are, of course, there's those businesses that have no knowledge of customers at all. They've just got an idea. That's it. So the context, I think, for smaller businesses is so much broader than bigger businesses, because bigger businesses, they've got shareholders, they've got boards, they've got CEOs, all this stuff. They're pretty uniform in how they're structured. But a small business can be anything really, and it can be one person running it, and it could be 10 people. And you might work with a 10-person team that makes barely any revenue, barely any profit, and they don't have much margin. And then you might work with someone who's one person and they've got a product that's selling really well, but they want to take it to, the next level. So it totally depends on the context. But for me, the first thing to do is to shut up and listen. That's the first thing I do. It's tell me about the business. Tell me lots of stuff. Just feed me the information I want to know. Let me have a look at your financials. Let me understand what's actually going on right now. I think it's bad practice to just walk in and say, let's just do these tactics straight away. I think that would be foolish.
Let's talk a little bit about like what you actually do in like, let's say, a day in the life of Samuel, because often when we hear marketing, some people think you're gonna be like typing out tweets or social media posts. Other people might be, I don't know, thinking you're doing some kind of like media buying or anything else. Like what are some, let's say, things that you do in each project, or that keeps your day-to-day on a more practical level?
Yeah, so all of those things you just said. I end up doing all of that. So often I'm in a situation where I'm working with marketers that aren't as experienced as me or aren't as qualified. And what happens is I then fill in the gaps that should have been done. So for a small business, often they will have, maybe someone doing some social media, maybe someone who's a freelancer doing some graphic design, but there's no plan. Nothing's put together. So I will be the guy that comes in and ties everything up, to justify what we're doing, rationalize it. But of course, that also means that I end up getting stuck in as well. So I'll often be buying the ads, running the ads, measuring the ads, creating the budget for those ads, justifying them. And sometimes I end up working with organizations where I just take on like a project that they've been paid to do. And I'm acting as like an intermediary who kind of does everything from, creative to briefing an agency to getting the creative to then running the ads and then measuring it and then reporting back. And then also research projects as well. So I do a couple of those sometimes where it'll be a small business that wants to know more about the customers. That's all they want. They just want to know who the customers actually are. So that'll be like a short project where I'll just be basically trying to understand who they're actually trying to sell to. Other stuff as well, like perceptual maps. So again, trying to help businesses understand where they sit versus their competition. So, what are the kind of attributes in the market locally that people associate with the category. So if it's an electrician's, what do people think of electricians locally? And then trying to measure those attributes and see where that business sits on those scale of attributes. So again, it could be something as simple as our customers say we're really fast. They love that we're fast, and they say we're faster than everyone else here. So you just work that into any marketing material they do, really. So
Mm-hmm.
you say, well, that's kind of, it's not positioning. And this is what I mean about small business marketing. It's not to be caught up on the process as such. It's kind of a, yeah, you just kind of throw it all in a bucket and see what comes out. So you say, well, people say we're fast, so we use that. We don't assume what customers want. We actually do try and listen to what they appreciate about the business and just kind of feed that back to them with our communications. So yeah, quite a lot of stuff, quite broad.
Yeah, like, do you ever get the feeling that you're because we hear a lot about like being very niched and like honing in on your skill set, and on the other hand, like if you really approach marketing properly from a like a holistic standpoint, there's so much to consider. Do you ever feel like you're spreading yourself too thinly?
Yeah, I do. Um, it's tough. It's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. And I mean, I'll give you a bit of background. When I first started in marketing, I came from a video production background,
Mm-hmm.
but I've also always been quite entrepreneurial. So I've had little side projects and stuff that I've always worked on, random e-commerce stuff, and none of it made a lot of money, but it was just stuff that I like to do. I've always kind of been business minded. So, and when I was in video, I was self-employed as well. So I went into marketing employment, got trained, got educated, then went freelance, and kind of always done a mix, whether it's employment and freelance or just employment and all over the place. But yeah, you're right. When you do everything, it is sometimes a case of spreading yourself really thin. But I think that's the reality of marketing for small businesses, which is you
Mm-hmm.
can't do everything perfectly. So you have to try and just make sure you're doing everything okay. Because for a lot of businesses, they're not doing anything okay. They're just kind of day to day operational
Yeah.
stuff. They're doing the same stuff they've always done. So if you come in and do everything that should be done at 50%,
Mm-hmm.
that's better than doing none of it, at all, period. So it's harsh, like to sometimes say that and be like, oh, well, I'm not doing as good as I could do if I just focused on one thing. But in terms of my career and what I do, it served me well to be able to kind of be a generalist and just
Mm-hmm.
be like, yeah, I just kind of do a bit of everything,
Yeah,
because I can
no,
kind of.
I feel that, like, because like what you said about improving like a lot of things, like instead of being really good in one thing and like optimizing that to the maximum, it's more about like that big, those big chunks of improvement. And as you said, like you can't get hung up in the little details if you're doing that. So I agree completely.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, because I think research is one of those elements which is interesting in this space. For example, I know a lot of people in branding, brand design, brand identity design that want to get into brand strategy, and basically that means one part of it is like writing the internal narrative, the values, whatever, like the positioning statements and stuff. But a lot of that is tied to research. But most people say, well, I mean, I don't have the budget to go out and do focus groups or whatever. Like, how do you research on a budget?
Well, I mean, this is the benefit of being trained. You
Mm-hmm.
know how to do the methods, so you don't need to spend the money.
Okay.
And I think people overcomplicate stuff as well. They think you need big, expensive focus groups, when the reality for smaller businesses is that actually they just need to use a variety of different methods and try to cross-reference that information and see if those
Mm-hmm.
answers are relatively consistent based on the different methods that they use. So again, it will be a mix of running things like SurveyMonkey to existing customers,
Yep.
getting a focus group if you can of a couple of, even if it's just 2 or 3 customers that are good customers, and then talking to other people that buy in the market, ethnography as well. So actually seeing where customers buy and how they interact with products and things like that. And there's a lot of research you can do to kind of try to validate as best you can theories and ideas and things, and I don't think it's a case of having an expensive research budget, because I mean, it's really cynical of me to say this, but the commissioned research that I often see for smaller businesses is often justifying someone else's opinion. It's a I think this, so here is a brief find that out for me, justify that opinion, so that they can then take it to someone else to say, well, we've done the research, rather than doing it how you should do it, which is kind of open-minded research, really. And you go, well, let's just try and find stuff out, because
Yeah.
right now we know nothing. Everything is an assumption. It's like these strategy days that smaller businesses often have. It's a thing. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but there's this thing where people will say, right, we're going to get a consultant in and we're going to have a strategy day. And what it ends up being is some person with a PowerPoint presentation, and they talk about the values of the business. And really, the reality of that exercise is just a load of people repeating back their assumptions. And then they write it on a PowerPoint on a blackboard, and then they go, yeah, that's our company values. But
It's
they've not
like
actually
patting
asked any
yourself on the
customers.
back.
Exactly what it is. It's just it's not actually going out and talking to customers and understanding customers. And again, it's the little things can make a huge difference, especially to smaller businesses. And it definitely is the little things that are overlooked.
Yeah. There's something that's been like playing in the back of my head for a while now, because I've been doing like on the one hand I've been doing a lot of like in-depth research, talking with customers, doing interviews, focus groups, more qualitative stuff like surveys and stuff. And then there's that moment where you have all of that information, and part of it is very often what you said about like it's basically retrofitting an idea you have to like validate something that you want to do and give it some power. On the other hand, it's like with all of that customer research that you have all of those elements, but on the other hand you read about stuff like Byron Sharp and distinctiveness, and basically it says that there is not really any meaningful differentiation. And when you link those two together, often I wonder like what's the big use of understanding your customer if the answer isn't really building a meaningful brand. I don't know if you see what I'm heading at, but there's this kind of friction in between those two. I don't know
Mm.
if you've ever felt that.
Yeah, I mean, my maybe controversial to Twitter, but my view is that there is an academic argument here versus the practical realities of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is that yes, how brands grow is brilliant, but at the same time, it's not looking at small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So while I know it's true, and I know that it's valuable and you have to use it, and yes, you have to be distinctive. That it's like that conversation between is it differentiation versus distinctiveness. I think that's a
Yeah.
stupid binary. It's both.
Mm-hmm.
To me, there, but I don't understand the argument anyway. It's never been about owning a particular attribute. It's never being like we are the brand that represents family focus, because everyone kind of shares those attributes. We know that they share them across the category.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, if it's a smaller business, if you can say with evidence that you do that better than your competitors in your local area or in a small geography, why wouldn't you do that? There'd be no reason to do that. To turn around and say, oh, we don't need to focus on what customers like, we can just have nice logos and distinctive assets. That's just, again, that sounds to me like you're saying, well, I read a book and this is what the book said, rather than using a variety of resources to kind of, stew mentally, so you can think about an approach that you would take within the context of a business. And sometimes you might do these exercises and find actually there is no differentiator. People
Mm-hmm.
do just think the same. And if that's the case, then you say, well, what else can we use? Then you go, well, hang on, everyone thinks the same. We're I don't know, like let's say you're a local bank, and everyone has the same opinion of you and all the other banks in the city, but all the other banks have blue branding. So then that's when you go, well, we need to apply and create distinctive assets. So we're going to be orange, and we're going to be a bit more fun and lively and a bit more young and a bit different. I think sometimes we make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And that's something I've noticed myself is like leaning into what you can see and what you can find out, and working with that is also very important instead of like taking everything you know from the world of books. So yeah, that's interesting what you said about the branding part, like the visual differentiation. Is that something you also do as in your role, like considering the distinctive assets?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important because it always annoys me how so many businesses, they look how they look in that industry, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a common phrase. This is how we do it in our industry. And the point you want to make is that doesn't matter. It's not a club, you know. You're not
Hmm.
friends. You're in competition with other businesses. If they're blue, you should be red, you know. It's that
Hmm.
kind of conversation. So I always try to like nudge people to remember that, you know, that actually you do have to look different, because most people don't care about your business. They're not thinking about your business. So having those cues are what you really need. Stop thinking about your mission statement and think about, you know, do you look different? Do you stand out in some way? You know, whether it's how you talk, whether it's how you look, whether it's how you're branded, whether your staff are a certain way. You know, it's like stuff about personal branding. People say, oh, well, you know, do people have a personal brand? It's like, well, it's kind of a non-conversation really, because if you're a small business, then a founder who's really popular and really cool and everyone knows that they're a distinctive asset, because everyone
Hmm.
knows who that person is. So you should use them as part of your marketing, you know.
Yeah, and like what you said about because I think a big part of this whole strategy thing is often coming up with the words, coming up with the narrative. And that's been interesting to me and challenging, kind of challenging, is because actually I'm a designer from background, is finding ways to show like those non-verbal cues, the visual cues, and make them informed as a strategy. And it's a really hard conversation to have, because it's easier to talk with your client about, okay, is this what we stand for? Is this what we believe in? Is this what we want to position ourselves? But then when it comes to all of those non-verbal cues, who seem to be maybe even more important often than the and that's what I struggle with as well. And I'm wondering if you do as well. Like often you do feel like writing down a lot of this stuff doesn't always have like it doesn't always have that big impact on the business that people believe it does.
Yeah, 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 definitely. I think the funny thing is with marketing is if you do marketing properly, it can appear so academic and boring. You know, if
Hmm.
you sit there with a client and you talk about building distinctive assets, they'll switch off because they're like, that's not interesting, that's not cool. So
Yeah.
you have to kind of gloss it up, don't you? And you have to kind of use their language. So, for example, with a lot of businesses now, I don't talk about strategy, because to most people, strategy means planning. And
Hmm.
for me to sit there and try to explain, oh, no, 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 strategy is really different, they're not interested. So instead of saying strategy, I tend to say focus. And some people have said to me, well, you shouldn't maybe not use focus, because, you know, that kind of goes into that whole conversation. Again, that becomes an internal conversation between marketers. But for me, saying focus is good, because with
Hmm.
clients, it puts them in the mindset that they need to focus on a few things and not do everything. So for me, that's like it's how you use their language to kind of speak back to them.
Yeah.
And it's the same with building distinctive assets and stuff. It's like saying, oh, well, you'll just look like everyone else if you do that. And it's almost like putting fear in them and saying, well, yeah, you can do that, that's a cool logo, but it just looks like everything else. It's not cool, it's not new, it's not fresh. So what you're doing is really you're building the business case for distinctive assets. And you're doing that yourself, but you're talking in a way that they kind of can understand as such. Because I found that if I get too markety and too like I am on Twitter with
Hmm.
clients, a lot of them don't get it, and then I end up trying to teach them stuff. And some clients like that, but a lot don't. They don't want to listen to you teaching them. They just want you to motivate them and help them grow their business. Really, that's the reality of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree completely that that's a big part of our role, and it's probably different in a more corporate environment where you're maybe talking to a CMO who's read the same stuff as you, or like whatever. Um, I'm wondering in terms of handoff, and again, I know this is a contextual answer because there's different sizes of teams and stuff, but what are maybe some things we can talk about when it comes to handing off a strategy and guiding that and making sure that the business actually executes properly on what you've said is that focus?
Well, this is the toughest thing, isn't it? It's getting other people to do what you want them to do. So yeah, I mean, all you can do in these instances is to do the best work you can do, and then to try and motivate them in a way that benefits them to get
Hmm.
them to do it. Because if you just say, "Here's my great idea, here's the great plan, it's all been signed off," they might not necessarily listen to you, especially if they haven't talked to you a lot. And sometimes you have that with staff if you've not really talked to them, but they're the ones who are doing it.
Hmm.
So if you say, "Well, here's this big marketing plan, and you've got to execute social and digital media in a certain way," and you've never talked to them, they'll say, that's not how we do it here. That's not how I do it. Why are you telling me how to do my job? So having those conversations with those kinds of people is really important. But also, there is a reality there, which is a lot of the work we do, if it's strategic or planning based, it might not necessarily get used. It might not actually happen, which is fine in a way because we're getting paid for it at the end of the day, and it's the client's choice whether or not they use it.
Hmm.
But I think it's about accepting that sometimes that's, you know, not going to happen. But so all you can do is try to motivate people and try to, you know, inspire them to actually execute, and try and work with them as well to understand the resources, because I think that's a lot of things that I see in marketing is people say, oh, we got this new software package or this new social media platform, but the reality is that a lot of small businesses don't have the resources to actually apply that or do it properly. So by understanding the resource limitations within a business, whether it's financial or time is obviously the biggest one, really. uh, and trying to understand that in context, it helps you make decisions that people can actually apply, rather than just give them this big plan which sounds great but actually no one can actually do it because they're so busy with other stuff. But it's definitely a tough one, the
Hmm.
handing stuff over, which is why I personally try to run something from start to finish. I
Yeah.
don't feel very comfortable if it's like I plan, like do a big media plan and then I hand it off and nothing's done with it, because one, it's demoralizing when you do a lot of
Hmm.
work even if you pay for it and it doesn't get done, and two, you know that if they just listened, things would work out a lot better, you know. So if you can go with them through that journey and help them execute it, I always find that to be far more rewarding.
Yeah, and like if you're not able to execute on the strategy, very often it does get like botched by somebody else, and then maybe they'll say, well, your strategy wasn't all that good because it didn't work out, but maybe it wasn't in the execution, or the other way around, of course.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm not sure if you read Halo Effect by
Yeah.
Phil Rosenberg. Yeah, I mean that book, JP recommended to me um, years ago, and I read it recently, and I just thought it's so true. And people, you know, you can you can do something perfectly. You can follow all the processes, you can tick all the boxes, you can take the right approach. But the reality is, we're working with complexity and chaos.
Hmm.
So you know, there are so many external pressures on the kind of work that we do that we can do everything right and it still won't necessarily work out. But accepting that is kind of freeing and going, actually, I'm not to blame for everything. But at the same time, if a client does say your work was bad, it's always like a kick in the gut. But at the same time, that's where you've got to be honest with them and say, I'm not making promises. I'm not going to say to you, I'm going to 10x your revenue, you know, because to be honest, if you said that, why wouldn't you just make your own business, you know? So marketers saying things like that, which is they can guarantee you results, I think they're being a little dishonest. So I would always say, I'm trying to improve the odds of success. I'm trying to bring clarity to it, trying to make things clearer, trying to make it less stressful, you know, and trying to direct stuff as opposed to being like, I'm going to guarantee you a good result.
Yeah. Like there's two things I want to dive into. One is maybe more of like a question about your business, but I think it's some interesting thoughts. And then the other is more about like the let's say the duration of a project. Like how long does a project typically last for you?
Um, Again, it totally depends on what it is. So I've had a couple of day long projects that have paid quite
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've had a couple of, you know, 6 month projects that didn't pay
Yeah.
very well, but it's consistent income.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it just depends on what the project is really,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and also what can be afforded by the client. Because sometimes someone will want something, but they can't pay for it all in one go. So that
Yeah.
3 week research project becomes a 6 month research project because they can't afford to pay you all of that money at one go. So you just work with them, you know, over that time. So it really depends on what the client's looking for. So in terms of how I work, I will charge an hourly fee for on the phone consulting. So if someone just wants to talk to me for an hour, I'll just charge them £75 for the hour. But
Mm-hmm.
if it's a project, then we will talk about the project, work out a brief and a scope of the project. And I will always ask a potential client to basically brief me so I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And also, it's a litmus test to see whether or not they're serious. and then work with them through a project, which could be any amount of time. But then there's also retainer work as well. So working as like an outsourced marketing manager essentially.
Hmm. Yeah, because when it comes to pricing, there's like some different schools of thought. And I guess like a lot of people in branding love the idea of value-based pricing, where it's like you try to put a price on the outcome, which is very, very tricky, of course, when it comes to branding. And I guess a lot of people would say it's easier in marketing because it's a little bit more measurable in terms of the return on investment. I don't know if you've ever like ventured down that path of trying to put a price on the outcome or the ROI of your services.
Yeah, that's a good one. So I don't charge hourly fees
Mm-hmm.
for project or retainer work, and the reason I don't do that is because I just say to the client, okay, well then I'll take 8 hours to do this thing that would have taken me two,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll still
Yeah,
be
yeah.
paying me the same. It's that kind of conversation. When you say it like that, they go, oh, actually, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Why would you charge me an hourly rate? That doesn't make any sense to me. Um, so I will always charge a project fee or a retainer fee, and break down the services that I'm offering.
Mm-hmm.
So I will give a clear idea of the services that I'm going to provide based on the brief that I've had from them, and then break that down in terms of timeline, in terms of deliverables. And again, in terms of pricing, I price to the client as well. So a client
Mm-hmm.
that's bigger, I will charge them more money.
Yeah.
If they're a smaller client, I will charge them less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wonder, like you've worked probably with a huge amount of small businesses. I don't know how long you've been in this business specifically.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the thing. I've kind of really been doing stuff for other businesses, small businesses, since
Mm-hmm.
I started working, since I was like 20. So for
Yeah.
10 years, really, I've worked, in all kinds of sectors as well. So I've worked in agencies as well. So I've worked, for finance, legal, agriculture, tourism, health, property, uh, products as well, e-commerce, kind of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Which is good, because what you end up doing is finding that actually they're not that different. you know
Yeah, that's interesting because a lot of people say, well, you need to pick your niche because then you can really start to like repeat certain processes, and I guess there's some industry specific things, but as you did, like I've worked with a lot of different industries and categories, and I think that's actually quite interesting. And as you said, like the processes can get repeated a lot. So yeah, maybe one question I have about, like, you've been working with all of these smaller businesses. What are some common like marketing mistakes you see these businesses make?
Well, this is I could talk for an hour or more about just this. But yeah, I mean, the typical one
We've hit the
is,
jackpot.
yeah. Am I allowed to swear?
You're allowed to swear as much as you can.
Okay, so the main one is throwing shit at the wall and hoping something will stick. That's the main one, which is so many businesses get caught up in busy work, which is, if we just do more hours and we just do more stuff, eventually something will work. That's why people throw around the term agile,
Hmm.
or they throw around the term flexible or fast paced. But to me, that just means clueless, because those are often the businesses you go into and you go, what's your business plan? And they just look at you like you're talking in an alien language. And you say, do you have a business plan? And they go, well, we did 10 years ago when we first started, but now we don't. So I think that's it, and that of course will then feed down into everything a business does. So I don't think that's just applicable to marketing. I think that is applicable to the entire company,
Hmm.
whether it's HR, whether it's accounting, whether it's anything really. So
Yep.
yes, it is a marketing thing, and it is very, very much a marketing problem, but it's kind of, a lot of businesses are like that. So as a result of that, what you end up with is completely just going wild on tactics, and
Hmm.
mostly digital. It's just whatever's trendy and whatever's a fad or whatever's popular at the minute, you do that. You just
TikTok,
do whatever.
Snapchat.
Yeah,
Let's go.
yeah, exactly. You just do what everyone else is doing, because if you do what everyone else is doing, then surely some of it must work at some point,
Yeah.
maybe. So that's the most common one, and one thing that I have a particular issue with is small businesses hiring young underpaid staff as social media
Mm.
managers or digital marketer. And what happens is, sadly, is you end up with someone who's maybe just finished university and they get put in this position where they're expected to do social media. And what that really means is manage 12 million different social media accounts, create content, which again is so vague, and then
Mm-hmm.
also do all of the graphic design and just basically be a real dog's body. And as a result of that, you end up with someone who's really stressed out, isn't actually very good at their job because they're doing too much stuff, and at the same time makes no impact.
Yeah.
So,
Isn't yielding any
and the reality of
results.
that, yeah, and it's really expensive too because this person's on a salary. And this is what businesses forget. They think social media is free. They think they're being really
Hmm.
clever, but they're not. They've got to pay a wage cost to maintain that. And the reality is that they'd be better off, hiring a marketing consultant who can come in and create an annual plan for them,
Mm-hmm.
because it will make the whole thing a lot easier. So that I think is the main one, which is businesses just go in too crazy with social media, and you do see it still all the time. It's very much like it's still 2013 in small business world, which is, you go on to a small business Facebook and they're posting 3 times a day. You go on their Instagram, they're posting twice a day. You go on Twitter and they're posting 5 times a day, and you just think that is so much effort and it will be making no real difference. And
It's
you look at the
crazy.
reach, and you look at the followers, and it's just, and the only reason they do it really is because that's what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, that's like I've seen that so many times, and it's also like it's a big part of why clients come to people like you and me, like because they think they need that and it will work. Like, and that begs a question, like, have you seen like any differences, or how do you feel clients perceive marketing in general? Like before they've worked with you, what are their expectations for like these small businesses?
Yeah, um I think for small businesses, the general expectation is that it's marketing is comms.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is because a lot of people work in small businesses, you know, when they started doing marketing, that's kind of, they did it themselves or someone just kind of did it alongside their job. It wasn't necessarily like a role or something that they're educated about. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
mean that to kind of say small business people don't know what marketing is, but for them, marketing is generally comms. So for me, when I come in, the first thing I do is I'm just really honest and I say, well, marketing isn't just comms. Marketing is going to explain why you need to do comms, or if you don't need to do comms, and how to do
Hmm.
those comms. And then they go, what do you mean? They say, well, marketing is all about the market. It's all about your customers and how you get them to buy your stuff. And then they say, okay, so it's like sales. And you go, well, it's like sales, but bit more, with a bit more planning in it. Sales is something that you use in marketing, but it's the justification. It's the means to the ends. And then they go, oh, okay. So it's a bit like running like a business management thing. And then you get, yeah, it's a bit like a business management thing, which is, what are the resources? How can we get more customers? How do we allocate those resources in a way which will get you the most customers, basically? And then they go, oh, I get it. And then you kind of start to slowly drip feed in a bit more details about, as to what marketing actually is. And what I try to do is I always try and steer people away from comms.
Mm-hmm.
So I go, stop. Let's not talk about social media. Just keep that ticking, keep that going. Whoever's doing that now, they can just keep doing that. That's fine. We don't need to stop right now. But I will do, like, again, those studies where I'm basically saying, this is how much it costs you to post on social media 3 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
This is how much that money costs. This is how much it's costing to reach 1,000 people. And they look at the costs and they're like, oh, wow, that's really expensive. And you go, yeah, but no one did the math to figure it out. So it's those kinds of little things. It depends on the client, really. But a lot of my clients are people who want to learn. They want to know more stuff because they've followed me on Twitter. I do get a lot of people inquire through Twitter who've been following
Mm-hmm.
me for a while, and then there's referrals as well. And sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes clients expect me to come in and they expect me to be like, I'm in, and then within a month I've made them loads of money and I can measure everything. And it's like, well, that's not how it works, and I'm not going to say that's how it works, but they still expect it. So it totally depends on the people you're working with, and the more open-minded, the better, really, the more willing to learn.
Yeah, and that I guess like that last part is really, it sounds like a lot of people coining themselves as like a performance marketer, or like data driven, or those types of like marketing. And on the same hand, there's a lot of people, creative people, I'd say, that like roll their eyes when they hear just even the word marketing. It's like, oh no, there's a marketer involved. It's like these people are evil, but that's usually because they're very like not aware of like the full spectrum of marketing, and they give marketing probably a bad name. I don't know if you've noticed that as well.
No. I definitely think that's true. And one of the things I do when I'm talking with clients, I do boast about and blow my own trumpet is I say, I'm trained, fully trained, I'm highly
Hmm.
qualified, and I'm chartered as well. You know, that I'm like properly professionally accredited marketer. I'm like an accountant, but in marketing. So you can trust me. I'm not just going to waste your money. And that's kind of how I try to differentiate myself versus the performance people. And when they talk about, oh, this performance guy came to me, and I was like, what's he doing? They go, oh, he does Google ads. And I go, yeah, I can do
Yeah.
that. I can do Google ads. I can do that. It's easy, really easy to do. And then they go, oh, is it? And they go, yeah, I can do that. I could just do that with what I'm doing now. And then they go, oh, okay. So sometimes I've worked on projects where there's been these performance people, and then I've just kicked them off the project, got them fired because I looked at their work and I was like, well, they've got this really cool attribution stuff set up, but I've done some, baseline shift studies to look at incremental sales, and actually all they're doing is taking credit for sales that would have happened anyway.
Yeah.
And how much are you paying them? And then they say, well, I'm paying them this, and I go, well, you don't need to pay them that because I can do that for you, and it won't take much time.
Yeah, I love that.
So that helps me because I mean I came from a digital marketing background. I came from that. First thing I did when I was in marketing was digital stuff. So I was running
Hmm.
PPC, I was running Facebook ads, all of that stuff. So it's and obviously there are people who are really good at that, but at the same time, it's not a good idea just to go, I'm just going to get a Google PPC guy in and not have any marketing plan or really anything.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like I see that a lot where it's even the same with branding, like people saying like let's put in a $10,000 rebrand or something. It's like let's maybe first take a look at if this really the best solution in any case, or whether that's like doing a video marketing campaign or rebrand or anything. It's basically taking that step back and trying to understand why. Um, maybe like, do you have any examples, case studies, things you've done in the past that were like in some way exemplary of like doing good marketing for small businesses that you can share?
Well, I have NDAs with clients,
Yeah, I get that.
um, but in terms of the work I've done, I always know that it's made a difference because I can
Hmm.
see it in the revenue. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things I do with my clients is I make it very clear that I want to see their financial records because
Hmm.
I want to track it. And I'm very keen to be accountable and to actually have proper tracking. So one of the things I do try and do with clients straight away is to build a hierarchy of metrics. So we're
Hmm.
actually trying to measure something that's strategic towards their goal and not just measuring just the outputs. We're trying to measure how things tie together, and it's never perfect, but it always gives me an idea of how things have worked. So last year, one business I worked with, they went from about, I think it was about £17,000 a month revenue to 6 months later being on about 36, which is of course a huge difference. Whether or not that was all down to me is another question, but I know that the work I was doing was definitely contributing to that.
Yeah, like that's really interesting. Did you want to elaborate a little bit on other metrics? Because of course revenue is almost like, well, it's not the ultimate metric because there's still profit, which is different. But like, what are some metrics we can look at that are good from a marketing standpoint? And it's probably not how many likes you've got on your post, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is where the academic, and again, not to discredit the academics because they're brilliant, but
Hmm.
this is where the academic mixes with the practical, which is that if you're doing digital marketing, ignore click-through rates. There's no
Hmm.
correlation there with purchase intent. Ignore engagement. Ignore likes. Ignore follows. It's all rubbish. Figure out the size of your market and try to calculate the percentage that you're reaching. Because we know that reach matters. So it's really making sure that you are measuring the right things. And in many cases, you actually end up with a very small bucket of metrics.
Hmm.
You don't end up with a lot. So if it's a very service driven business where people are serving customers face to face, use something like NPS, Net Promoter Score. And I
Hmm.
know that a lot of people will say it's not perfect, but it can be a great way to keep an eye on the quality of your staff, for example. So if you find
Hmm.
that a member of staff is going out and their scores are not as high, then that's a question for, does this person need more training to be better at doing that customer service job? And stuff like that. Those are marketing metrics that are more important than, again, the marketing metrics that most people think of, which is just digital comms stuff. So, and in terms of measuring the impact of campaigns and sales, it's more about looking at incrementals and
Mm-hmm.
baselines. So, working out pre-campaign baseline sales activity and then comparing that to during and post-campaign sales. And you won't be able to find perfect attribution, but that's not the point. That's not what you're trying to do. You're not trying to say this dollar led to this purchase. What you're trying to do is, when we ran that campaign, all things considered, did that campaign actually make an impact on sales?
Yeah, like you mentioned market share, which is a really interesting one to me. I've been dabbling in that a little bit more. The more you read about like the academic stuff, you realize that it's very important to understand that, but also it's so hard for like a smaller business to even like comprehend even in what market you are and thus what share you have. Like, do you have any tips or things to how to approach that? Because I always struggle with that.
Yeah. I mean, this is the reality, isn't it, for small businesses, which
Mm-hmm.
is you're never going to have accurate information.
Mm-hmm.
You're never going to get it. You're never going to get numbers that are perfect. They're always going to be way off because all you're
Mm-hmm.
doing is trying to make an informed guess by
Yeah.
getting as much research to try and qualify as best you can. So in terms of finding out market size, if it's let's say if it's a sanitary product for women, you would say, well, we're only selling in this town, so I'm going to go on Facebook audience insights, something like that, and you'd say, how many women are in that
Mm-hmm.
geography? That'd be one simple example. Another one would be, let's say you're a business insurance company. You'd say, well, how many businesses are there in my town, in my
Mm-hmm.
city? What area geographically can I service? And you would then just build a spreadsheet of those businesses, the numbers, and then if they've got companies house records, then you can try and look at their turnover if they've got that kind of information, so what kind of money they make in, and you can do that versus your competitors as well. So if you're trying to do a competitive market um comparison, then you would say, well, let's have a look at our competition. What kind of money
Mm-hmm.
are they making? It might even be in press releases. They might say how many offices they've opened this year, and you can deduce from that they're making more money because they're opening more offices and they're hiring more staff and those kinds of things. So it's never quite accurate, but it gives you an idea still. So if you've got, let's say, 10 businesses in a city, and it's one business that's always getting in the press and they're always getting the customers and they're always hiring new staff, you can pretty much guarantee that they're probably the one with the biggest market share. Because again, how brands grow, that's exactly what it says, which is, it's bigger brands get bigger, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. Um, Maybe let's, because we're already at the 50 minutes, I could keep picking your brain about some of these elements because there's a lot of interesting stuff to it. Maybe let's just end up with some closing advice. Like, anybody out there that is wanting to learn more about being strategic, learning more about marketing in the way you perceive it, which is very almost, you could say traditional, but I'm not saying that in an offensive way, in a good way. It's like looking at it from the whole. Like, what are some tips, tricks, I don't know, pieces of knowledge somebody could go to learn more or start getting better at this whole marketing field?
Yeah, I think. Well, are we talking, let's say, to small businesses, or are we talking to
Yeah,
marketers right
I'd
now?
love to keep it at that range because I know there's and I've been talking with Byron Sharp and other people on the show about the big meta of things, but like maybe what are some interesting resources or maybe just a piece of advice for people to go out and do whatever you feel like sharing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like platitudes, but you know, be objective in what you do. Try to detach yourself from the business personally.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest pitfalls for small business owners is they are so personally invested in an idea or a business or a project that they see it as an extension of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
They see it as part of their core personality. And the problem with that is you can't view things objectively when you do that. You can't criticize it because it's your baby. So what you end up doing is you just try to look at the positive side of life. You just think about the positives. You ignore the negatives, and you can only do that for so long. So I would say, try to detach yourself and be objective. Try and think of your business as a patient that needs, a GP to come in and diagnose it. What's the problem? What are the problems? What are the issues? And how can we solve those issues?